In this episode, I'm joined by the Professor of Art College at the RCGP, Professor Kamila Hawthorne, who's just taken on the role. And in this opportunity, you're going to have the chance to talk to her, but also have your questions answered, which we've had lots of them pre-submitted as part of the InnovAiT podcast. So I hope we're going to have a great episode as we crack on. And let's start going through it, shall we? Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining on this really reasonably chilly and wet evening. I don't know how it is where everybody else is, but that's how it is here in Nottingham. I'm really happy to be joined by our new chair of the RCGP, Professor Kamila Hawthorne. How are you doing there, Kamila?
I'm very good, thank you. Nice to be here.
Thank you. And thank you for sparing some time to join with us. I can imagine things must be absolute chaos right now with taking on the new role as chair, and particularly at this time where, let's be honest, there are significant challenges in general practice. So I really do appreciate the fact you've been able to spare some time to join us on the InnovAiT podcast to share your thoughts on your new role and also hopefully what this is going to mean for the college, general practice, and obviously all of our listeners and viewers and stuff. Before we get started, I thought it'd be really nice though if you could just tell us a little bit more about yourself, because there may be some people who haven't come across what you've been up to and stuff. So
yeah, of course. What a pleasure. So yes, my name is Kamila Hawthorne. Actually, it's really pronounced Kamila, but even my husband doesn't say that, except my mother when I'm in trouble. So Kamila is fine. I'm somebody who grew up in East Africa, in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, came to the UK when I was 10, did my secondary schooling in Southeast London, trained in medicine in Oxford at Somerville College, and then went up to Nottingham to do VTS in Nottingham. So I know Nottingham well. And that was where I had my first partnership and in Arnold in Nottingham. And then because I was married to a hospital career husband, somehow his career came first. And so when he moved to Manchester, I moved to Manchester, was a GP in Fallowfield in Manchester for 3 years. And then when he got his consultant's job in Cardiff, I moved down to Cardiff. So that was about 27 years ago. I've been in inner city practice for 31 years in one place or another. But 4 years ago, I moved up into the Welsh Valleys, and I'm now a GP, salaried GP in Mountain Ash, a small ex-mining town in between Merthyr and Aberdare. I've got specific interests in type 2 diabetes. My research interests were in providing culturally appropriate health education to South Asian communities in Nottingham and Manchester. When I arrived in Cardiff, I thought that would be the end of that because I didn't think there were large groups of ethnic minority communities in Wales. And of course, I was very wrong and ended up working in the Bangladeshi community in Riverside. And then with more funding from Welsh government, we expanded the work to Somalis, Gujaratis, Sikhs, African Caribbeans, Chinese, all sorts of people. It was just huge fun. And so, yes, I have a special interest in health inequalities. Through that, I became interested in medical education, taking medical students in the practice. Before you know it, you're just putting one foot in front of the other. I found myself organising the other GP tutors at the medical school in Cardiff. And then from that, I became sub-dean for assessments, and then associate dean for quality and quality and governance, and then ended up at the University of Surrey for 3 years trying to set up a new medical school. And my most recent big job was at Swansea University as head of graduate entry medicine at Swansea. And I've managed to keep on practicing as an everyday GP, although not every day, 1 day a week GP, all through all of that. So yes, I've had a really varied career, which I've really much enjoyed.
Wow, definitely sounds like it. And particularly you mentioned obviously a lot of the work you've been doing with health inequalities, and we know that that's definitely something that's had a huge focus on in the past few years in particular, and obviously COVID shone a massive light on particularly some of the health inequalities we've seen across the nation and stuff. What do you see as the key challenges that we are facing when it comes to health inequalities currently?
Well, I think we're facing many challenges. For me, one of the really big things is that health inequalities is grounded in social inequalities. And until something is done about that, we may just be tinkering around the edges. Mm-hmm. However, there is something that we can all do. I think it's everybody's business. And it is going to be one of my strategic priorities as chair of the RCGP over the next 3 years. Although I must say, I do think that workforce and workload have to come number one, because until we can create some headspace, nobody's going to be able to think about much else other than how they get through the numbers of patients that they've got to get through at the moment.
Sure. And I know that in a lot of the pre-submitted questions, we do talk about some of those challenges in terms of workforce and that kind of stuff, which we will get to. And just to say to our people who are joining us live, I can see we've got quite a few people joining on the live stream and stuff. If you do have any questions and stuff you want me to ask to Kamila, then let me know in the chat. I'll happily try and ask those towards the end. But we've got a few that we did want to get through. And obviously, this podcast is primarily designed for our trainees and stuff. And I guess the first question that we did have is, what are your fondest memories of being a GP trainee?
So I was a GP trainee in 2 places, 6 months in Eastwood, just outside Nottingham, and then 6 months in Arnold in Nottingham. And I think my best memories are learning on the job, my trainer, who was very supportive, and the partners in the practice, really learning about partnership, about team working, and that enjoyment of almost having an extended family. I had lots of adventures in Eastwood. For me, this was the far north. I know lots of people will laugh at that, but I'd grown up in London. The degree of snow was something to be, I was flabbergasted, really. And, going to work with a shovel and a pair of Wellingtons was a real adventure. I also had other adventures, usually all car related. On one occasion, I'd gone to visit an old lady, and I drove the car off a grass verge through what I thought was a puddle, but which actually turned out to be the top of a culvert that was draining a nearby field, and the car just sank down 3 feet into water. So that was all very exciting. And I think, also learning, I was a very young doctor, learning to flex my clinical muscles. Seeing things that I'd never seen before, seeing patients present in a way that never fitted with a textbook, and actually just getting to know people and getting to know communities. I remember one particular case of a physio, actually, who'd had a hematemesis, and who really didn't want to go to hospital but needed to be admitted. And we had a real ding-dong about this. I was actually 7 months pregnant at the time. And at that point, the baby gave me a real good kicking, and I sat down rather heavily and said to the physio, the patient, "You've upset the baby now." And at that point, she said, "That's okay, I'll go." So I sort of learnt, quite a lot about the kind of human side of being a doctor, as well as the sort of medical side of being a doctor. And it was a good time.
Wow. You talked about, obviously, your GP rotations and how enjoyable and adventurous they were, particularly when it came to car-related stuff and things. I guess one of the other questions we had from some of our trainees is, how do you make sure that trainees are treated fairly during their hospital placements, which does still obviously form part of the training perspective? And, many do feel that at the moment GP trainees are treated as service provision. And I guess that can therefore challenge the learning opportunities they have. Do you have any words of wisdom for them?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is reduce the amount of time they spend on hospital placements, actually. So I know it's slightly circumventing your question. And of course, it has reduced tremendously since the time I was a trainee, when I spent 2 years, 24 months, doing 4 6-month hospital placements, whereas now I think most people are doing 12 months, so about half. And quite honestly, in the future, I'd be hoping it would be 0 in hospital placements, and people just go in and out of hospital to learn the bits that they can't learn in general practice. But most of it should be done in general practice. I think it's very important to be upfront if you feel that you are being used as rota fodder. But it is very difficult sometimes, because, you want to make a good impression. So, you're always in a difficult position, really, as a junior doctor. In that respect. But it is very important to keep the perspective and remember that it won't be forever, and it won't be long before you'll be out there as an independent practitioner yourself. And I did it for 2 years. Did I enjoy it? No, not always. And I did a lot of things that were filling rota gaps, but actually none of it was completely wasted. It's really interesting. At the time you think it's rubbish, but it does all stand you in good stead in the end.
No, I definitely agree with that. I know as a trainer myself, trying to help trainees understand the perspective that the rotations, although they may feel like service provision, and let's be honest, sometimes are, but that doesn't mean there isn't learning to be had in terms of how that interface can particularly work with primary care and the impact that has on patients. And as you mentioned, also the clinical skills that they may be able to develop from that. I guess if we're going to talk about training, one of the things we would kind of have to talk about is the assessments, and in particular, obviously, the exams is a hot point and topic for many people. Particularly, obviously, had the change from the CSA to the RCA, and whatever that's going to change into, because there is a plan to change it that many people I know are aware of. But I guess from your perspective, are the exams fair? I think is probably the best way of asking this, and if not, what's the future for them?
So I think the exams are about as fair as they can be made, in a kind of a bureaucratic system that's trying to get 3,000 people through and out into independent general practice. The AKT is machine marked and anonymous. The questions, they look difficult to me. And they were difficult in my time when I did it, when it was paper 1 of the MRCGP. But it's all part of your learning, and they're very. I know how carefully those questions are written, because I have myself been an MRCGP examiner for about 25 years. I'm not anymore, but I have been. And although I've never been on the AKT question writing group, I'm well aware of the care that's put into thinking about the background to each question, and all of the questions are piloted and tested before they're put out into active, hot exam papers. For what was the CSA, I was around when the CSA was first designed and developed. It seemed a really exciting advance in those days, based on a simulated surgery, whereas before we'd had videos to mark, and this seemed so much better. And of course, I think it's had its day, the CSA, it's time to move on. The RCA came along because of COVID. It was really only intended to last for a few months. But of course, nobody realized how long COVID was going to last for. At first, it was thought the RCA might be the answer because candidates could submit their own patients. They weren't subjected to standardized cases. And those exams were being double marked. So they had 2 examiners marking each case. But it really made no difference to the outcomes or to the marks when we came to look at it. And now there is a great deal of work being done to develop a new module that we hope will be ready for November 23, which will enable candidates to take the exam in their own practices virtually, again, using standardized cases, but cases that have been written to reflect modern general practice, not the sort of cases that we used to have before in the CSA. So I hope that there will be lots of changes there. Differential attainment is at the forefront of everybody's minds and wanting to reduce that as much as possible. And a lot of effort has gone into redesigning the marking domains of this new assessment, which has been piloted now in September, but still needs further development and further changes before it can be submitted to the GMC, hopefully in February, March of 23. And until the GMC have approved it, we really can't go any further. But it has been, the funding for all of this has been approved by trustee board and council. So, I'm very hopeful that this new module will be even better. We've got to move with the times. Will it completely get rid of differential attainment? I suspect it won't. Because I think there are more things that cause differential attainment than just the exam itself, But I think we have to keep on trying, and it's really important to all of us that we make this as good an exam as we can, and make sure that it is as fair as it can possibly be. But, exams are just not always fair to everybody. It's a really tough thing to do, particularly when you're trying to get, as I said, 3,000 people through every year.
Okay. I think, like you said, there's definitely challenges that we're going to face with the changeover from the RCA to whatever the new exam is going to be called. I believe it's something like the SCA or something like that. interesting in terms of the time frame. So you mentioned hopefully all being well November 23. I guess that definitely some perspective for trainees who are currently ST3 or in that changeover phase of understanding what their options are. But it sounds like there's definitely progress happening, and I think some standardization sounds like a really positive step. Because I know my personal thing with the RCA is the lack of standardization actually presents a real challenge, particularly for those working in deprived areas where the consultations can be challenged by the average kind of what you would see in general practice elsewhere and stuff.
Totally. I think it's really difficult because in a way, the more you standardize an exam, the more reliable you make it. But the more reliable you make it, the less valid you make it. And it's trying to get that balance between reliability and validity. It's a real art in itself. Yeah.
Very much so. You mentioned the new consultation models and stuff. I guess, how can we continue to focus on having the new consultation models part of GP training? Obviously, general practice took a light speed jump over COVID in terms of how it works and stuff. And I guess there are questions as to how that works effectively in training, because as you mentioned, unfortunately, training can be slower to adapt to the changes. And just apologies to everybody who may hear some Christmas music. It sounds like there's a parade going on outside my house right now.
So yes, I think it's important that we all get trained up in remote consulting methods, because this is new-ish to even established GPs who've been around for a long time, such as myself. I must say I still prefer face-to-face to virtual, although I do both. Certainly the college is running a regular course on remote consultations. It's usually done monthly on telephone consultations and triage skills training. It's delivered virtually and live. It's open to all GPs, regardless of experience, and it's a one-day course. It's a practical course, provides realistic tools and techniques in telephone triage and consultation. So, I'd suggest that people look into that and see if they think it will help them, particularly if they're preparing for the exam. The courses are really popular, which is why they're scheduled so frequently. I was just trying to remember, but I think some of the medical defense organizations also provide courses in remote consulting. So that might be another thing to look into to see if your MDO provides such a course, because quite often those are free. So I think it's definitely worth looking into. And then finally, the RCA training courses provided by the college also go into some detail about remote consulting. So again, worth thinking about one of those.
Okay. I guess one of the other parts of general practice training is about the whole concept of out of hours, and we've seen lots of stuff around out of hours on a regular basis. But I guess one of the questions we had was, where does actually out of hours sit in terms of training people into general practice and stuff? Should there be more exposure or balance? Because obviously we are seeing potentially less people going to do out of hours. Is that because maybe there isn't the same level of exposure there used to be in previous systems of GP training and stuff?
I think we have to remember that out of hours is part of the 24/7 GP offering, and a lot of GPs do work in out of hours. Whether often it fits with a flexible working lifestyle, if that's what you want. So working evenings or working weekends is very often something that many GPs will do, at least for a period of their professional lives. So in terms of the training, I think it's very important to have out of hours training before you finish and become that independent, safe GP. And yes, I think we certainly need to make sure that trainees get a good experience in out of hours training. I'm not really an expert in it's been a long time since I've been a GP trainer. So you'd probably know more about how much out of hours experience trainees are getting currently. The last time I was a trainer was about 10, 12 years ago.
Okay. I think currently it's set at 72 hours per year that they're meant to have exposure to out of hours and stuff. And I know that they have recently included emergency care into that. So obviously the on-call aspects of things, but it can't obviously be all that. It does need to be some specifically out of normal working hours and things, which I think has made it more realistic, because obviously on call is a different type of skill when you're delivering urgent care to patients and things. But I think it is interesting that the exposure to that is predominantly obviously typically in ST3 years, because obviously you need the skills to get to that, and that can prove interesting, I think. I guess as we're moving through the career of GPs, though, one of the things that often is asked is, how can you make a career of general practice sustainable for an individual? We obviously have our GP trainees when they finish, and sometimes it can feel a bit like a cliff edge, maybe. I know that's often a description that we used for the first 5 movement years ago when I started. But how can we make it sustainable for those people coming out of GP training in particular?
So I think being a GP it can be one of the best jobs in the world, but it has to be properly supported and resourced. And at the moment, it's not being properly supported and resourced. And I think that's a real difficulty for trainees coming out into general practice. And many of them are competent, but not confident. There's a big difference. I must say, I'm not especially keen on extended GP training, into 4-year GP training. Partly because I know that there's no funding for it. When we've asked in the past as a college, people have been very polite, but essentially there's no money in the kitty for that, and it's not going to happen. But what I am interested in is what I'm calling a 3+2 program. So you do your 3 years of vocational training, and then you do a +2, which is voluntary. You don't have to do it, of a fellowship. Where you'd be salaried, you'd be working part-time in a practice, the same practice for 2 years, and you can use that time to develop yourself professionally, to get settled into general practice, to be partly protected. So it wouldn't be the same as being a trainee, but it is not the same as being completely cast adrift. And you can learn how practices function, how they operate. You can have some time to develop an extended role if that's what you want. And I'm certainly seeing new GPs increasingly being very keen on the idea of having a special interest, something that they particularly enjoy doing. And I must say, over my years as a GP, and I've been around a long time, I've been a GP for 34 years, I started off with an extended role in diabetes, and then it switched to rheumatology, and I've had extended roles in minor surgery and in medical education. And so it may not always be the same extended role all the way through your career. And it's great that we are so generalist and so diverse in, what we can do, in that, you can change your extended role. You can do different things, whether it's working in prison service or working with asylum seekers. There's all kinds of, exciting things that you can do that supplement your general practice. General practice has always been my core. And then around it, I've wound these other things. It's only more recently that they've taken over, towards the end of my career. So I think that that's one way of sustaining being a GP. The other thing I think that has helped me, and which I just learned, I suppose, on the job, is learning to switch off. And certainly when I was a young GP, at the end of my day, when I went home, I used to physically lock the front door behind me when I went in. I no longer need to physically lock the front door, but I do so mentally in my head. And, being able to switch off and just say, okay, I'm leaving that outside, I think is very important. Another way to be supported, of course, is, leaning on your partners and being in part of a partnership or in a sort of regular group of doctors and other healthcare professionals working together. And, you can have a lot of fun that way, particularly if you get on with people. We've just had our Christmas party, and we had a wonderful time that evening. And, it's an opportunity to learn about people's children and grandchildren and their pets and their hobbies. And, you're part of that community of practice, if you like. And that also is a way of being sustained, which means that when times are bad, it's easier to go to somebody and get supported, and also to give support if other people need it. So those are sort of, I think, the main things that I would say. I'd be really keen, because I know that a lot of trainees, when they finish their MRCGP exams, think, well, that's it, I'm just going to dump the college now. And in a funny way, that's what I wanted to do all those years ago when I did my MRCGP back in 1988. And I those of you who've read some of the things that I've been written about will know that when I finished my oral exam, my Viva exam at Prince's Gate, as was in those days, I stomped across Hyde Park thinking I'm just never going back there again. And look at me now, isn't it strange? But what then happened was I didn't leave at that point. And 2 or 3 years later, because I developed an extended role in diabetes, I then also developed a research interest in, because in those days, the high prevalence of type 2 diabetes in South Asian communities was new. It was exciting. We'd only just discovered it. We wanted to know why it was happening. We wanted to know how to deal with it. And so I developed a research interest and was looking for funding. In those days, the college used to offer research training fellowships, and I got one of those. So that sustained me for 2 or 3 years, part-time, working part-time as a GP, part-time doing the research. I then ended up in Cardiff and tried to join my faculty, which was the South East Wales faculty, and really didn't get on there. But I didn't feel that the people who attended were like me. I didn't have enough in common with them. But round about that time, I was talking to another GP in Cardiff, and she said to me, you should try becoming an MRCGP examiner. I'm sure you'd love it. And so I had to resit the exam and redo and do the psychometric testing that they make you go through, and became an examiner. And, again, in a funny way, that made my career. It gave me an interest in medical education. It gave me an interest in medical assessments. If anybody had said to me when I left medical school that I'd be interested in assessments, I think I'd have laughed at them. I really would have. But actually, there is a science to it, and there's an art to it as well, and there's a real interest in trying to get it right. So, in many ways, the college made me what I am today. And I would say, to people listening, don't give up on the college. Give it a go. And to some extent, you need to reach out and grab opportunities. Don't wait for them to come to you. Go in there and get them, and make sure that you get your value for the money that you're paying. And certainly from my role as chair of college, I would be really keen to support people if that's what they want to do.
Thank you. I guess I'm going to change tack slightly because of your answer, then, if that's all right, and jump to a different question that I had planned. And it is one that has come through as probably one of the most popular questions. How can we increase and engage the membership more so, particularly within the college? Because that has been a criticism, shall we say, of recent times. Yeah.
So we've got close on 54,000 members at the moment, and people of all ages, at all stages in their professional careers. But you're right, we are very anxious to increase our membership and to engage our members more than we currently do. I hope that some of you will have noticed there's been a change since I became chair. I've only been chair for a month. But we have started to try and engage members more already in the type of email letter that I sent out. So it's only been 2 so far. But in addition to that, we're adding in a you said we did type of feedback so that you can see, because one of the common refrains is, what has the college ever done for me? And the college is doing quite a lot, but perhaps we don't shout about it loud enough for members to know. What I am seeing on Twitter is a few people are saying, well, maybe I will now come back and be a member again, because the college is now starting to talk about general practice in a very much more robust way. And I am trying to do that. I'm still a newbie, but I'm definitely trying to get out there and talk about the pressures that we're under, and that we want to care for our patients. It's not that we're proving ourselves inaccessible, but when you're seeing 40 to 60 patients a day or more, there is a limit to how much you can do. So I'm hoping that, as trainees come through, they will see the officers, they'll see the college members as role models, and they'll want to come and join us and work with us to make sure that this is a profession that we can all be proud of, and that the college really becomes their professional home, just as it's become mine. But to a certain extent, you have to reach out and grab it. And, again, I do remember as a young GP, I was a young mum in Cardiff with 2 children under 5, and the subscription demand came through the letterbox, and I looked at it in my kitchen and I thought, what am I getting for my money? And then I thought to myself, well, either you leave or you go in there and get something for your money. And that's what I did. And I'd hope that other people will do the same. But I think, it's about retaining members. It's about, for us as a college, we need to make sure that we've got something useful to provide to people at different stages of their careers, because people in mid-career will need something different to people in the first 5 years, or people who are coming to the end of their careers. I hope that's enough.
Thank you, Kamila. Apologies for those of you watching. I think we may have had a little bit of an internet bleb just then. But yeah, thank you for that answer and stuff. And I know that particularly the focus on the engagement with the membership, and particularly, I guess, non-members as well, which can be a challenge because it's hard to speak to people who you don't have an engagement route with. But I know what you say about, particularly in the last month, you're right. Obviously, I'm a massive follower on social media and stuff. Have seen a different tone from the communications of the college, and particularly that whole "you said we did" kind of perspective, I think can be a really powerful way to show what the college does do. I mean, I've been a member of the college since I completed training and seen, different changes throughout. I think the profession is in a really delicate place right now, and seeing the evidence of what the college is trying to do can be a really powerful message, I think, as well.
Yeah. And the college is really busy trying to do it. There are numerous meetings with NHS England, trying to influence, trying to maneuver people into making decisions that will benefit general practice, and the same with the Department of Health and Social Care. Last week, we were invited to number 10, which was a very interesting experience. And that was on the back of having written that public letter to Steve Barclay, criticising the decision to publish individualised data, practice data, that then led to league tables in the Daily Mail and the Telegraph. And, I'm sure our watchers are well aware of what happened there. So we went to number 10 last Thursday, expecting to be told off for having done this, but actually that didn't happen at all. And we had a very positive response from Rishi Sunak's special advisor in health, a chap called Bill Morgan, who listened really carefully, asked for lots of information, which we've sent him. And we're hoping that this will be the start of a good relationship, going forwards. Again, it's early days. I would just like to say that I met Larry the cat, didn't meet anybody else that I recognised.
Okay.
And I did ask if I could take a photograph of Larry, and was told very politely by the front doorman, no, you're not allowed to take photographs inside number 10. But he then very helpfully said that he could wake the cat up and put him out on the doorstep, and I could take a photograph of him outside. But as it was -4, we decided that, that was cruel to cats. So
yeah, a little bit chilly there, isn't it?
Yeah.
We talked about the situation of general practice, and I guess one question we had come through is how can we balance the whole aspect of the fact that through GMS and the main contracting mechanism general practice, there is effectively unlimited potential provision. How do we balance that with safe working limits that obviously are a challenge for many in general practice currently?
It's a real challenge, isn't it? I completely agree. Well, funnily enough, we're starting to talk to the BMA about this, because of course we can approach this problem from 2 different angles, depending on, which organisation we are. I mean, from the BMA's point of view, they can do it from a contractual basis to say, these are the numbers of patients that we think should be seen in a day. From our point of view, because we don't deal with contracts in that way, we can be talking about quality of care and how many patients it is safe to see in a working day, and what sort of rests we should be getting in between. I must say, from my personal experience, once I've seen 28 patients in a row, I'm pretty brain dead. Other people may have more resilience than me and manage 35. I don't know. How about you? What can you do?
So I must admit, on a full day, I'm averaging between 40 to 60. So
I know.
yeah.
And so, so am I. So am I. And I'm thinking to myself, if I've seen 50, what about those other 22 after the 28? What sort of service have they had? So I think, yeah, it's early days yet, but I think there is stuff we can do to try to change that narrative. The problem, of course, is, what then happens to the patients that we can't see? Where do they go? And if they're talking about, the Fuller report is talking about overspill centres, fair enough, but who's going to staff those? And, where will the clinical staff come from? So, yeah, which brings us back to that problem of there just aren't enough GPs.
I guess with us recognising that there aren't enough GPs, and despite the plans to increase the number that we have, obviously a lot of focus has been put on the additional roles, in particular through the PCN contracts and that kind of stuff. How do you see the synergy between additional roles versus general practice and GPs particularly, and also the public's perception of those roles as well?
I think the public get very confused as to who they're seeing. They often don't realise that the person they're seeing is not a doctor. And I had a patient the other day tell me that she'd seen a woman, a healthcare professional, in a GP surgery who turned out to be a midwife, but appeared to be consulting with her for something that was nothing to do with obstetrics. So I really don't know how that happened. So I think, there's great potential for huge confusion, particularly in the public, as to who they're seeing. I think that these additional roles are helpful. But they're perhaps not as helpful as we hope they would be. Bringing in additional roles doesn't necessarily mean that you can manage with fewer GPs. And so we need to keep pressing for those GPs. We need to make sure that, we keep the foot on the pedal for more GPs, not just more training posts, but also ways of retaining GPs, because I don't see those 6,000 GPs suddenly turning up anytime soon. It's just not happening. And if anything, our numbers are reducing. We're now about 710 or so full-time equivalent GPs less than we were a couple of years ago. So that's despite all the trainees coming in at the front end. GPs are leaving faster than people coming in, and we've got to do something about that. So again, in all of the conversations I've been having with government, I've been talking about retention strategies. There are retention strategies out there, but they're not well known. They're not well coordinated. They're not being linked together into some national strategy. There needs to be a lot more effort put into it, really, so that we can persuade people that it is worth staying, that it's worth, that something's done about the pension situation, as well as about working conditions, so that people aren't staying on in order to see 60 patients a day. It has to be a way that is sustainable for the individual.
Okay. I know in some of those discussions, one of the topics that sometimes comes up is the concept of having ACPs or SAS doctors, as they're called sometimes, to people who have not completed GP training per se, but can have a similar staff grade kind of role in general practice to support the workforce challenges that we have. What do you think of that, and what options are there in terms of that?
So I'm not against the idea at all, but if it's going to happen, it's got to happen properly. It's got to be done well so that everybody benefits. So, there have been SAS doctors in secondary care for decades, and they generally don't feel well done by. Many do feel that they're being exploited or that they're not being treated as well as they should be. So if we do get SAS doctors in primary care, I'd want to make sure that they were welcomed, that they were enabled to feel that they were valued and were of value. They would need, I think, to have, depending on what their backgrounds were, they would need some form of induction. They'd need some form of supervision because they're not trained GPs. And they would need, for some of them, a way to consider further training to become GPs. So some of them may want to become GPs, but not everybody will. And we need to be able to cater for all the individual, routes that may then come from it. So we're starting to think about this as a college. We feel that our role is about developing and maintaining standards. So our contribution would be about induction, about supervision, about training, about finding alternative routes to becoming a GP. And we would need to work closely with the BMA, who I hope would then deal with the contract side of things and making sure that these doctors coming in are not exploited. I'm sure many people will remember seeing a Panorama program not long ago where it appeared that a private company appeared to be running a general practice on physician associates. That sort of thing shouldn't happen really, and it's not safe. It's not safe for patients. It's not how it should be. So, I think we just need to make sure that we do it. If we're going to do it, we do it right.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We're coming up towards the end of the pre-submitted questions. We've just got a few more, and particularly some looking at the future, which I know is a great topic for us to always talk about and things. But if we're still talking about the current, I guess one of the things that we recognise that general practice is in a challenging situation right now. I guess there are some people who feel that general practice training is potentially a little bit too protected, and that, in terms of when people come out of training, then they kind of feel like it's overwhelming because it's a different experience. Are we protecting trainees too much, or actually is it the other way? Are we the boiled frogs actually outside?
Well, I think that, we have to remember that these are trainees, and to some extent they need protection, just as I was protected when I was a trainee. I think that as they pass through training, they need to do more and more of what a GP does. So that because we are producing cohorts of doctors who are competent but not confident. And I think that that's really important. So my daughter's just finished her GP training last summer. And it was very interesting to watch what happened. She ended up working as a salaried GP in the practice where she'd been a trainee, clearly deciding that the known devil was better than the unknown devil, and has been very happy there. It's working out well for her. But I think there are other people, whose training practice, perhaps they wouldn't want to stay in. They might want to move on, or they might, for personal and family reasons, be needing to move. So I think that I don't think that we overprotect trainees. I think, you need some protection in order, because you're learning, you've got other things, other stresses, you've got exams to finish, quite a lot of them. For international medical graduates, trainees, some of them are worrying about visas and being allowed to stay on. That, there's a lot going on for trainees. So I would certainly want, if I had a trainee now, to enable them to do more and more as the time goes by, so that by the end they're pretty close on what I'm doing. But I'd still see them as people I would want to shelter. And of course, this is why I'm so keen on the 3+2 idea, and I'm talking about it more and more to people as I meet them, as I get introduced to them.
And I think it's definitely something that I'm seeing more of in terms of the opportunities for fellowships following training and stuff, which I think, like you say, is a really positive route, given the fact that, like you said, it doesn't look like extension to training is going to happen anytime soon. Yeah. I guess we also do obviously have GP trainers who may watch this. And I guess one question I had from a fellow GP trainer is, what would you say to trainers out there who are trying to support these new colleagues coming through, but potentially struggling? What would your advice or comments be?
So I'd be saying, please keep going. Our new GPs need role models. We need you. We don't want you to give up. We need mentors and role models. The 3+2 fellowship scheme, I'm going to be pushing really hard. And the people I'm talking to sound interested, because I think these schemes are already up and running, as you say. It's just that, we're not really publicizing them properly, and we're not making it easy for people to get onto them. I think it's really important that we keep our trainers in there. We are doing a survey at the moment on GP practice infrastructure, and we are keen to hear from trainers about what else they need to continue delivering and expanding training, because I think it's very important that we support them. Okay.
I guess if any people joining us live do have any questions, feel free to stick them in now, because we've got a couple more left for Kamila and stuff. And I guess one that I really did want to ask, you mentioned this earlier about your priorities, and I know that when we have a new chair come in, often they have things they want to focus on. So I guess, what are your priorities for the next 3 years? Because, let us know.
So, well, I went into my priorities in some detail in my hustings. But it's interesting because the college sets strategic priorities every 3 years. So the current bout of 3 years finishes in April 23. And so we've got a strategic priorities paper going through council at the moment. And of course, what we're trying to do is to set up the strategic priorities for 23 to 26 in line with my strategic priorities. And so the top line for me, of course, is workforce and workload, in line with the college's already published Fit for the Future document. If people are interested, do have a look at it. It's easy to read, which is, it includes all the lobbying that's needed about the 6,000 more GPs, about reducing paperwork and, unnecessary bureaucracy, about enhanced retainer schemes to enable people to stay on. So all of that we're going to carry on doing. But in addition to that, I'm afraid I'm a bit of a pragmatist. I can see that, as I said earlier, those 6,000 GPs aren't going to suddenly show up out of nowhere. And to some extent, we have to work with what we've got. And what have we got? Well, I feel that as a college, one of our biggest assets are our members. Our members are bright, they're innovative, they can ride change. Just look at what happened with COVID. And many of them have found themselves in situations that have been pretty challenging, and quite a number have found solutions to those situations, and we don't talk about it. So I think that, one of the things that we should be doing, this is all part of that first strategic priority, by the way, is publicising what people have done, how they found solutions to different problems, and asking them if they'd be willing to act as mentors to people who've got similar problems who might like to talk to them about it. I mean, that's what you do in a membership community, in a professional home, you talk to each other. And I don't think we do enough of that. So that's one of the things that I've got up my sleeve for the future. My second priority is valuing GPs and our members. And we are developing what's called a member value proposition that, again, is coming through council, looking at this sort of question, what do you get for your money? Again, reviewing what it is that will make the college into every GP's professional home, regardless of what they do, bearing in mind that there is a huge diversity of GPs who do a lot of different things. So that's quite a challenge. The third one is health inequalities. And the fourth one is sustainable healthcare. And as Arti Bansal often says, the sustainable healthcare one is the golden thread that runs through all the others, because if you do that right, you do quite a lot for the other three priorities as well. And I do feel that is, with climate change, climate challenges, this is everybody's business and we all need to get involved.
Okay. You mentioned, obviously, the news cycle starting from April onwards for the next 3 years. I guess for those people that are wanting to get involved, or interested in potentially influencing what those decisions and priorities may look like moving forward, how would you recommend they do that?
I think probably the best way to do it is through your faculties or through nationally elected members. So, there are about 60-ish members of council who are GPs, of whom about 2/3 of them are faculty representatives. And the others, the 18 who are nationally elected members, with a rolling set of 6 being replaced every year. So either stand and become a nationally elected member yourself, or else find out who your nationally elected members are. It's all on the college website, and contact them and lobby them, and also go through your faculties, join your faculty boards, get involved. College papers are now discussed before council meetings. Most of them are available on the college web pages. We've just started, again, as part of our sort of transparency push, to put video of actual council meetings onto the website. We've started with just one item to begin with, just to see how it works, to see how many people watch it, to see what sort of feedback we get. But in fact, the last meeting of council, the November one, was the first time we did it. And it was actually, I think it was actually discussing the strategic priorities paper. So yeah, you kill two birds with one stone, really, if you find it and go and watch it.
Fair enough. And really glad to hear that has finally happened. I know when I was actually an elected member, that it was one of the things we were campaigning for quite heavily at that time. So
yeah,
finally, yay! Happy for that.
Yes, I mean, I was slightly worried, to be honest, because I thought there might be some members of council who'd feel inhibited if they thought they were going to be on a webcam that potentially thousands of people could watch. But it didn't seem to have inhibited anybody, actually. So yeah, we had a really good discussion.
Okay. And I guess as we're looking, like I said, towards the future, from your perspective, what is the future for general practice for both our patients and for our colleagues and obviously our upcoming GP trainees?
That's a really good question. I've been emailed by two very senior academic GPs, very senior, separately, and I don't think they knew that the other one was emailing me. And both of them have said to me, this is a really difficult time for general practice, Kamila. The future of general practice rests on your shoulders. And I'm reading this and thinking, oh my goodness, really? So I hope it doesn't rest just on my shoulders, because I think this is something that one person can't change. This is something we all need to be working at. And please come and work through the college. We'd love to have you. I think there will be lots of things. Ideally, the future I would like to see is one where general practice survives and thrives. Where we do get more doctors, whether they're hopefully SAS doctors and more GPs. The expanded GP workforce, the allied health professionals, I think they're key, but they won't take that much work off us. They will give us expanded opportunities for patients, which will be good for patients. But I think we will still need expert generalist GPs to deal with that aging population with chronic conditions and multiple morbidities and polypharmacy and all the rest of it, because I don't think allied healthcare professionals can do that in the way that we can. I would like to see investment in better premises and better IT and infrastructure in general practice, and improved data and digital tools. There's lots of exciting advances in medicine that are coming through, lots of ways in which, personalized medicine will allow us to look at a patient, and instead of at the moment choosing an antidepressant and hoping it'll suit them, it'll be just wonderful to be able to know that this particular antidepressant won't suit this patient, but that one will, through genomics and pharmacogenomics. So there's lots of exciting advances in the future that will come through, and hopefully we will work in these integrated care boards successfully, work with our social care colleagues as well as our secondary care colleagues, and just provide a much better service for patients, because at the moment the NHS is really creaking at the seams, and of course even more so at the moment with strep and flu. Yeah, it's a real test, I think, this winter.
Unfortunately, I think you're right. I guess with that, where do you see the next few months for general practice heading?
Well, I think we're going to struggle on, as we are doing, really. I see chinks of light, I must say. I've been, as I say, surprised at the positivity with which I've been received by Number 10 when I went there, and by Neil O'Brien, who's the new Undersecretary of State for Primary Care. Of course, this government may only last a couple of years, but I'm seeing, again, Labour and the Lib Dems talking about more medical students, more medical schools, more trainees, more doctors that are homegrown. It'll be a very interesting and challenging time for us all. I think we all need to buckle up, and it's going to be a bit of a roller coaster, really. I don't think that things will just suddenly get better when the weather improves. I think it was going to carry on being challenging. I'm certainly doing what I can whenever I'm asked to speak on the radio or television or in the newspapers about what life is like for us, how much we want to work with our patients, and how much we want to do for them. So that trying to change that narrative of anti-GP rhetoric that we've seen for far too long, really. So that we, if we can change and move that narrative so that we're working with our patients rather than being bashed about the head by the press. I think that in itself will be a really good move, and in itself will allow GPs to feel better about themselves, a lot better about themselves.
Thank you for that. And thank you for your time. I guess if people did want to have a closer engagement with the college or yourself, where would you direct them to find out more information and stuff?
Well, I think certainly if you email me, I will. I hope I don't get emailed by 54,000 people. But if you email me, and if you email me to my chair's email box, that would probably be better in terms of being able to then channel requests through to the right people. So it's chair-rcgp@rcgp.org.uk.
.org.uk. I'm just going to put that on for everybody so they can see that, hopefully. There we go. So that's the email address. And I believe you are on Twitter as well, if I remember rightly.
I am on Twitter, yes, although I'm not very good tweeter, but I do my best.
I think so that's Kamila at Kamila RCGP, which obviously available to be contacted through there.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time, Kamila. I know that we've had a lot of questions come through, and I was really appreciative that you've taken the time to answer those questions from our members, and particularly from our GP trainees who have submitted the majority of those questions and stuff. So hopefully answering the topics that are very pertinent to them as well. I hope maybe we can have you back on the stream maybe in a couple of years' time to see how your progressed and stuff, and hopefully in a slightly better position for primary care as well, in terms of what's going on. But again,
I hope so. It won't be for lack of trying, I tell you.
Definitely. Again, thank you for your time. I guess it'd be a really opportune time for us to wish Merry Christmas to everybody. It's just a couple of days away.
Happy Christmas, everyone. Yeah.
And a Happy New Year to everybody else. Obviously, if you do want to check out more information that we have from the podcast, do check out this stream right here that's coming up. That's from our colleagues that did the big GP consultation. You'll be able to check out that talks about potentially the future of general practice and some evidence that they've created and found to help us understand what the future of general practice is. We'll catch you in the next episode.